something a little bit different in this video. We've not got the Range Rover here at the moment. My sister's got it for this week. I've got a few little jobs that I need to do on it, and I've got the parts here ready and waiting. But until the car comes back, we can't do anything. So I thought, well, let's do a little video on some little or unknown facts that you might not know about the Range Rover. Now, the Range Rover has been with us now on our roads for the last 52 years. So, in obviously various forms. Obviously, the Range Rover nowadays is completely different to the original. There's a lot of history about the Range Rover and all the bits and pieces that went into it and that. I thought I've just pulled a handful of little facts out, little tidbits, some unknown, little known knowledge. None of this is unknown facts. We're not breaking new ground here. But I thought I've pulled some facts off the internet and I thought I'd share them with you. We'll throw up some pictures as we're going along. The original Range Rover was released in 1970, but that wasn't the original name. Oh, there you go. When Land Rover started work in 1966 on what we now know is the Range Rover, the working name was the 100-inch station wagon. So what do you drive now? Oh, I thought, I'm driving a Land Rover 100-inch station wagon. It wasn't going to fly, was it? So obviously, hence came up the Range Rover. There you go. I'm just going to read through this bit because this is sort of like the history and the genesis of the Range Rover, which dates back to 1948. Obviously, the Range Rover didn't hit the roads until 1970. Obviously, the Series 1 Land Rovers and that, I think they came out in 48, I believe. It was shortly after the war. After the war, the factory, obviously, it was producing a lot of stuff for the war effort. After the war, they had a lot of space, so they started branching out, the Rover. Read up on the history. But anyway, I'll read through this bit, and I'll put some pictures up as we go. So, the genesis of the Range Rover goes back to 1948. Although work on what became the first model Range Rover didn't start until the mid-60s, Land Rover, or Rover as it was known then, had been searching for a model to fill the same gap in the market since the end of World War II. The Rover factory had been massively expanded during the war to produce military equipment, and civilian models produced didn't use nearly as much available space in the factory. So the introduction of the Land Rover helped, but the bosses knew that demand would change and customers would want something new. So the 80-inch station wagon was born, launched in 1948, and it fell on its arse. Back to the drawing board. People just obviously wasn't interested in it, There followed the idea of the rear-wheel drive Road Rover in 1951, based on a Rover P4, which bobbled along for a few years before being further developed and almost reached production in time for 1960, but it was never given the final green light. It wasn't for another decade that the idea finally morphed through several different prototypes and finally became the Range Rover. So the Range Rover story does date back to 1948, but obviously the Range Rover as we know it didn't start until the mid-60s. But the idea was there. They knew what they wanted. It's just getting it all into fruition, isn't it, basically? It's history for you. And we won't go down the road of British Leyland and this, that and the other and unions and governments and everything cocking up the car industry in the UK back in the 70s. But there you go. Obviously, Range Rover, they started developing it in the mid-60s. Obviously, they brought out prototypes, this, that and the other, using the Rover V8, which was a detuned Buick engine, I believe. So the Range Rover prototypes and pre-production cars went by a different name. There's a bit of a story to this. I will have to use my notes because I can't remember all this stuff. There's so much to remember. It's a name that we all know now because Range Rover actually does have a model called this. But back in the 70s, they badged their cars with this name to basically hide from the press. Nowadays they send cars out covered in bloody camouflage and all sorts, don't they? But they slapped this name on it. Now the name was originally used on the Rover P6 BS, whatever that is. I know what P6 is. A chap named Mike Dunn was asked to come up with a name using letters from Alvis and Rover. He came up with Velar. As you know, we all know the Range Rover Velar. It's a smaller version of the full-fat Range Rover. Now, Velar in Spanish and Velare in Italian means keep secret or hide everything. Did you know that? Velar or Velare, keep secret or hide everything. So that was the idea behind that name. Obviously, it's using letters from Alvis and Rover. A lot of you youngsters out there won't have a clue what an Alvis is. I only know because I used to work at a garage where we did classic cars. You don't see many about now, and it's one of those long forgotten car manufacturers. But yeah, using the letters from Alvis and Rover, he came up with Velar. Keep it secret. There you go. There are a few pre-production ones. They was all registered actually on their V5 logbook, Velar, but when it came to renew the tax on them, a lot of them were changed to Range Rover. There are still a few about that are still badged and registered as a Land Rover Velar. There you go. A little bit of useless information for you. So when it comes to motorsport, now in this video we're just concentrating on the Range Rover. There's all varying sorts of Land Rovers out there. This is just for the Range Rover. Now when it comes to motorsport, the Range Rover, it does have a motorsport pedigree. And you're like, what? The very first Paris-Dakar rally in 1979 was won by a Range Rover. Did you know that? And then the Range Rover won again in 1981, and then that was it. Obviously, other Land Rovers might have won in subsequent years, but yeah, 1979, the winner in that category. Obviously, there's motorbikes and cars, and this was back in the day where anyone could just turn up, and you didn't have like all your factory teams. So yeah, it does have motorsport pedigree, the old Range Rover. Yeah. The Range Rover is the only car that has been exhibited in the Louvre, or Louvre in Paris, as an art exhibition. Did you know that? I believe it is a quarter scale model. I don't think it was the real size thing, because the picture that I put up, you see someone stood next to it. They're not, you know, Range Rovers are quite tall. And I did read somewhere it's a quarter scale model, but it's the only car, as of 5 years ago, whether one's been put in there since, I don't know, to have ever been exhibited in the Louvre Museum. And it was placed in the museum as an example of exemplary industrial design. Now, I think you'll agree, it is quite a good bit of design, especially the Range Rover Classic. I mean, I've had 3 of those. And I won't say with the exception of the P38, because you could still tell it's a Range Rover. The lines you get on the Classic, I think, got carried through to the L322 quite well. You've got the same shapes and everything on the L322 that you had on the Classic. The P38, not quite so much. Now, this is a thing. The original Range Rover had its production run for 26 years. The P38 only went for 7 years, and then they replaced it with the L322. I know there was a lot going on with Land Rover at the time, being owned by BMW, then Ford, and then this and that, and it's a mishmash of bits and pieces all over the place. Yeah, I mean, the P38 is a good car. I've had one. Sam's got one. Yeah. I don't think you can beat the original. It was so well designed to start with. And they're so bloody expensive now. I'd love to get my hands on one. Maybe if we win the lottery. I keep saying this. Anyway, let's get on with some more facts. The original Range Rover designer thought that using them in cities and towns was stupid. Stupid! Stupid! Yeah, I'll read this. Charles Spen King, who led the first Range Rover design team in the 1960s, was dismayed by the way the car has been adopted by what he called was the pompous, self-important driver. Well, there you go. In 2004, he was quoted as saying, to use them in the school run or even in towns and cities at all is completely stupid. He drove a Volkswagen Golf R32 and then he was killed in a cycling accident in 2010. I don't know, I ought to have looked it up. He might have got run over by a Range Rover. That would have been something, wouldn't it? Anyway, yeah, so the original designer of not the designer, but who was sort of in charge of it back in the 60s, thought that using them in towns and cities and the school runs was stupid. Which, if you think about it, it is. These ones that are running around in cities that do the school run and that, you never put it in the low box. You know, you don't need a bloody great car like that. The price of a Range Rover has changed dramatically since 1970. In 1970, it went on sale for £1,998, which was $3,095. Today, the most basic Range Rover in the UK, I'm going on the full-size Range Rover, not the Sport or the Velar or whatever, or the Evoque or anything like that. The most basic Range Rover in the UK, full-sized, is £99,375. Which is $120,641. Shit. The top of the line Range Rover will set you back. Now this is a starting price before you get all your, a lot of extras. This is probably from the SV line. It starts from £171,575, which is $208,292. Shit and corruption. That's a lot of money for a car. Now, if I won the lottery, I would buy one. Top of the range, every single, extra on it. Money would be no object, would it, if you just won the Euro Millions? Australian assembly. Did you know this? Jaguar Rover Australia began assembly of the Range Rover from CKD kits that were obviously shipped out there. And they was put together in the Enfield factory in New South Wales, Australia in 1979. I didn't know that. And then the government cocked it up. Obviously, the Australian government, I assume it's the Australian government. It could be the UK government, because they have a habit of cocking a lot of stuff up. Anyway, it says government increases in the tariff on parts led to the discontinuation of Australian assembly in 1983. So Range Rover was assembled in Australia from 1979 through to 1983. After that, they'd have been shipped out there, already built. Did you know where the Range Rover P38A, or the P38 as we all know it, got its name from? I didn't know this. I probably should have known it, to be honest, but the model was so named after Block 38A at Solihull, where the car was developed. There you go. One of the buildings at Solihull was called 38A. I can't find any pictures of it, but I'll put an aerial view of Solihull factory. I've no idea where it would have been. It was called Project 38. Official production codes at various stages included Pegasus and LP. But it's more widely known as by the colloquial as 38A or the P38. We all know it as a P38. There you go. Most P38s you find will be the 4-speed automatic. But the 4-speed automatic was only available as a standard fit on the 4.6 V8. The 2.5 diesel and the 4 litre, as standard, was a manual gearbox. If you wanted automatic, that was optional extra. There you go. I have driven a P38 manual, and I've had no idea what was standard, what was optional. But yeah, obviously from L322 onwards, it's all automatic. You don't get manuals anymore. The P38 was the last to use the Rover V8. After that, they used the BMW V8, and then the Ford V8s, the Jaguar, the Jaguar V8s, which are Ford-based. So the P38 was the last to use the Rover V8, and the interior leather was supplied by Connolly, who went out of business in 2002. Whether they went out of business because they was in association with Land Rover, who knows? And it was the first model to feature satellite navigation as an optional extra. There you go. I bet that was I do remember you used to see the old Top Gears and that. Oh, this has got satellite navigation and it's the next best thing to slice bread and it's this and it's that. I bet it was crap. But the Range Rover P38A was launched in 1994. We all know that. As a replacement for the old Range Rover Classic. But it didn't directly supersede the Range Rover Classic. They were sold alongside each other for a year. And if you do know your Range Rovers, you'll know that some late Range Rover Classics with a soft dash, air suspension, they're on M plates. M is 95. So they were obviously registered quite late. But so 94 and 95, they was selling the P38 alongside the Range Rover Classic. And that was in a bid for people to get people used to the change, because the original Range Rover had been around for so long, and it had various changes and little bits and pieces done to it. It was only available as a two-door up until 1981 or 1983. I can't remember. As I say, there's so much history on these cars. If you've got to go and look it up if you want to. Then they had like the 5-door version, and then bits and pieces they changed. It wasn't available as an automatic to start with. They were all manuals, and then they released it. There was a company that was putting automatics in, and they was doing a 4-door conversion, and they were sort of licensed by Land Rover. It wasn't till sort of 83 when the 4-door, and then the automatic was available, and the automatic was it's a Chrysler Torque Light gearbox. I think it was a 3-speed, if I remember rightly. I mean, I had a 3.9, and that was automatic. It was all right, did the job. So yeah, they used to sell them side by side. Didn't know that. I should know it really, but now when it comes to the P38, I was reliably informed by a Land Rover technician that worked at Land Rover on the day they released the P38. Now, I think it was Marshall's at the time. It probably still is Marshall's in Peterborough, Cambridge area. I don't know if it was countrywide. There was such a waiting list for the P38 that they was going to release them at midnight. So you could, if you've paid for it, ordered it, whatever, you could turn up at your showroom at midnight and drive away in your brand new car. As I say, I don't know if it was just the Marshalls group, which was quite a big group, or if it was Land Rover over the whole of the UK. 160 went out that night, and by the next morning 120 of them had come back. For whatever reason. I think he did say there was a lot of immobiliser problems going on and this, that and the other. It was just little fixes that they had to do. It could just be one of those urban myths, or it might be true. I can't find anywhere. They're not going to advertise that, are they? But this was from a Land Rover technician that worked there. He was doing all the PDIing and stuff. He said 160 went out at midnight. By the next morning, 120 of them had come back. There you go. Is that it? I think we've gone through them all. So that is it. There's loads of little facts like that, but I thought I'd just pull some out of the air, get on the internet, did a bit of research, and some of it I knew, some of it I didn't. Some of it's like, oh, bloody hell, didn't know that. I just thought I'd put this video out there. I know you all come here for the Range Rover content, so I thought we'd keep it Range Rover and just brush up on a little bit of our Range Rover history. So, as I say, there's a lot online. If you want to go and read about the history and how they developed it and this, that and the other and the engine they used, and there's a lot out there. And it's quite interesting. And, when the Rover Group, British Leyland and all that lot started falling in on it. So, you had Rover, you had Jaguar Rover, Triumph, all that lot was sort of falling on their arse. Land Rover became a separate thing. It became Land Rover Limited, and then they could pour a bit more money into it, and then that's they could do a bit more on the developing side. And look at where we are today, £200,000 car if you go for the full spec. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a big thumbs up if you did. You might have learned something. So if you've got any little stories or tidbits of information, stick it in the comment section below, and yeah, we'll have a read up on it. So that's it for me. Catch you in the next video. Bye for now.